Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and my mic, but you can put anything in the chat that you need to ask. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining in today. I'm excited to have the chance to talk to you about feeding birds and how that can spark science learning right at your classroom window. So my name is Kelly, and I'm from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I am really happy to be able to have the opportunity to be with you today. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with Zoom by now, but just in case, I do recommend that you exit full screen and dock your chat window to the side of your screen by finding the little speech bubble icon, clicking on that, and then making sure that your messages are set to send to all panelists and attendees, or it might just say everyone for you. And that way we can have conversations with each other in the chat window. So yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can find that chat window. And really quick, if you could just let me know what type of educator you are, that would be awesome. What grade levels you work with, informal or formal. Awesome. So I see we have Pamela, who's fourth grade at the Green School. Very cool. Environmental education, grades 4 through 12 from Mark. EE, grades 3 through 12. Cool. Lots of environmental ed and kind of a nice mix. That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Excited to have you here. So I want to just tell you really quick a little bit about the Cornell Lab of Ornithology for those who aren't familiar. Our mission here at the lab is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science, all focused on birds. And so we really try and use birds as a lens to study the world and engage the public with nature. And the lab is a nonprofit membership driven institution associated with Cornell University. And I specifically work with the K-12 education team, where our mission is to is to create innovative resources and trainings that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm the outreach coordinator there. If you email us at the K-12 Lab email, which I'll share with you at the end, you might also hear from my colleague, Susan, who helps monitor that email and will help answer any questions that you have or guide you to resources that you might need. So really my job with the K-12 education team is to package all of the amazing work that the lab is doing and make that available to you educators through a variety of different ways. We kind of take a two-pronged approach where we create curricular resources that might include things like one-off activities to free downloadable lessons to full curriculum kits. And we also like to do a fair amount of educator training, both online and when possible in person. Recently, in the wake of the pandemic, we have moved towards some direct interaction with students via virtual enrichment programs. However, most of our work is geared towards educators and providing resources and support for educators. Since you know your communities and you know your students and you know how best to reach and serve them, we want to just support you in that work. So I'm kind of have a slightly ambitious goal for this webinar. I want us to talk some bird feeding basics so you can walk away feeling ready to feed some birds. I want to share some resources that will help you support learning inspired by those birds and introduce you to some citizen science projects that complement feeding birds really well. And citizen science is just such a really great way to engage your kids in science that feels like relevant to them. So first, I want to start off by throwing it back to you. Why feed birds? Why do you think people are interested in feeding birds? Why might it be? a good thing for educators to use as a tool. Yeah, bird watching is a popular hobby, right? I always find that, like, for me personally, watching birds is very calming. I find it to be a centering activity. It helps me clear my mind. It's an opportunity to learn more about birds. Absolutely. Document the species that you see. All right. These are all great ideas. I think bird feeding provides a lot of great opportunities to do the things that you suggested, as well as bringing the birds right to you, right? And also, it helps our birds, right? If you live in, you guys are in Florida, so this might not be a familiar scene to you, but in the northern part of our country, and this is actually a photo from Europe, feeding birds can help them. And that's actually pretty true for you guys in Florida too. You've got migratory birds coming through. Um, and feeding birds can be a way to provide a supplemental food source just to help them through hard times. Plus, as I mentioned, it brings the birds right to you, which allows you to observe them in really close and intimate ways. You can see their behaviors and you can kind of get to know the birds that are around you. And what I love about this for educators is maybe you are in a school where you don't have a ton of access to the outside, but you could still hang a feeder and have the outside come to you. Or maybe you don't have funds for binoculars, but you want to do a bird study. You can bring the birds close enough with bird feeders that you don't need binoculars to see them. It also provides just some really great opportunities for merging with science. So I mentioned citizen science a few times, and we'll dive more deeply into what that is soon, but it is a way to engage students in science while watching birds or making observations of the outdoors. And it's a really exciting and real world opportunity to study some of your local wildlife, to build a connection to your local environment. And it really sparks kids' curiosity. Plus, it helps birds. And as educators, it's not a super high cost activity and you can do it any time of the year. So it really can be very flexible and fit well in your schedule of studies. Now, I have a lot of educators who will say, okay, this sounds good, but I just don't feel like I have enough birds around to do this. To which I reply, you are suffering from a condition known as bird blindness, which we have all suffered from at one point in our lives. It's just that you aren't tuned into the birds around you. You know, who has time to pay attention to everything going on the outside? We're busy, we're rushing. But as soon as you start to open your eyes and tune into the world of birds and start thinking about the birds that you might be seeing around you, you'll start to notice that they are absolutely everywhere. And there are birds all over the place, no matter if you are in the heart of a city or you are in a really rural setting, there are birds around. And there are feeder birds around too. So you can draw them into you and you can start to tune into their worlds. Now, I want to touch a little bit on the basics of bird feeding. If you haven't embraced this endeavor before, you might not be super familiar with some of the options out there. There are all sorts of different feeders and all sorts of different ways that you can draw birds in. You'll see here in the upper left-hand corner, we have one of these great tube feeders, very classic, serves kind of smaller to medium-sized birds that like to sit on perches. And then we have like these nectar feeders for hummingbirds, suet feeders for woodpeckers and other insectivorous birds. You'll often see nuthatches and chickadees and things on these as well. And suet is a specialized food made from often beef fat or other kinds of fat. And then hopper feeders, which are great for larger birds and kind of and mixed. group of birds. And then you can also do something as simple as this platform feeder, just a flat surface, favored by ground feeders and some of our larger birds. So here again, we can see some of those feeders in action. And as we look at this, we can begin to see that there are a variety of foods that you can choose to. We see here in this image a blue jay eating a whole shelled peanut. And if you choose to put those out, that's really going to attract your jays and maybe some crows, maybe some squirrels. But there's all sorts of feeder seed blends you'll see out there when you go to the store. And of course, there's other things like nectar or fruit that you can feed as well. So how do you choose the right food for your location? If you are interested in seed eaters, we have some great resources to help you. So you'll notice from this chart that there are certain seeds that attract more birds than others. So we can see that sunflower seed up here in the top attracts the widest variety of birds in this chart. It just doesn't really work for pigeons and doves as much. And then if you come down to something like Niger, really only finches or millet, finches and sparrows. We have this great interactive on our website, and at the end of our session, I will put a bunch of links in the chat window for you. This interactive is called Common Feeder Birds, and it is from our Project Feeder Watch website. And it will walk you through choosing the right kind of feeder and choosing the right kind of seed. So it's this great interactive. You go through, you choose the region that you're in, choose the food type that you're interested in, and the type of feeder that you're interested in, and it will show you the different sorts of birds that are attracted to that feed in your area. And right here in this screenshot, I am comparing Milo and black oil sunflower seed. And so you can see the difference in not just the number, but the variety of birds between these two seed types. So if I were only going to be putting one seed out there and I wanted to attract as many bird species as possible, I would choose the black oil sunflower. Of course, you can also make feeders with your students. This can be a really fun way to engage them in a short-term project. If you work in an environmental education site, it's a good way to have a program running, teach about bird food preferences and beaks, and then they have a fun project to take home. Or in your classroom, if you don't want to purchase feeders, you can challenge your students to make them. These are just a couple of really classic types. That soda bottle feeder, um, and then, of course, the classic pine cone. If you have concerns about nut allergies and you don't want to do peanut before the seeds, you can also do something like Crisco. And then there's all sorts of different ways that you can make feeders. These are some fun kind of like holiday themed cookie cutter feeders, and we have a blog on our website that will walk you through how to make a few different varieties of feeders. Another thing that I actually love to do with students is to challenge them to engineer a feeder. So I'll put out a call for what I lovingly refer to as junk. So recycled materials, weird old things that people don't need anymore, hangers, zebra costumes, shower caddies. I've used all of them. Um, and put them out in kind of like a point system and gives kids so many points that they can spend to get materials. And then it's their job to engineer a feeder. And you can put whatever parameters on that feeder that you want. Needs to be able to hang for a week, needs to be able to survive in the rain, and challenge them to design a feeder. And then see which feeders are most attractive to birds. So there's all sorts of ways you can make feeders rather than purchase them. We're also really fortunate to be sponsored by Pennington. So we do have some window bird feeders, and I'll tell you how you can get your hands on one for just the cost of shipping. Um, and I'll share a link with to that resource at the end of the webinar. But these feeders are really great for the classroom because they bring the birds right to your window. And when I talk about that, people will often bring up the concern about window strikes. So birds can often hurt themselves by flying into windows. Um, and I appreciate so much that this is on people's minds. But I'm happy to report that a window feeder like this fits into the safest zone or distance for a feeder to be from a window. So if we look at this chart, we can see fatalities after window strikes by percentage is on our y-axis, and then our x-axis is the distance of the feeder from the window. And we can see that within a meter is the safest zone to be. So hanging it on a window is very safe. And then when you get out to that 5 meter, 10 meter zone where a lot of people put their feeders, this is actually the deadliest collision zone. And that is because when birds hit windows, it's often because they're a little disoriented. They're a little scared often. So maybe a predator came by and they're nervous and they're flying away and they're not paying quite as much attention, and that reflection in a window fools them and they hit the window. If they're within a meter, they won't have enough momentum to hurt themselves. But if they're further out, 5 to 10 meters, they will probably have enough momentum to really hurt themselves. Further out beyond that, they're less likely to hit. There's more space for them to get away. So another challenge people will mention when they are feeding birds is squirrels. Squirrels can be a bit of a nemesis to bird feeders, even though they are part of our ecosystems and they're fun to watch. They can eat you out of house and home because some bird seeds can be a little expensive. So if you're interested in combating squirrels, there are things that you can do, like putting baffles on poles or over feeders, just to help make it more difficult for squirrels to access the feeders. Squirrels are also really excellent jumpers, so they can jump about 10 feet from a platform. And so if you can find a way to like put a feeder close to the building, but there's not something that they can jump from, or you can use a baffle so they can't come up the pole, you might be in pretty good shape. However, squirrels are pretty clever and they do find ways around things. So it could actually be another fun engineering challenge for your students to see if they can engineer a squirrel baffle or even engineer a squirrel-proof feeder. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to avoid squirrel conflict, we do have a resource called Bird Notes, and this particular one is on squirrels. And I will share a link to that again at the end in the chat window. Now I want to move into some resources that can support your student learning if you are interested in doing bird feeding. So we have these wonderful educator guides around children's trade books on our website. This is a snapshot of the K through 2 section, but we also have books in the 3-5 section. So our website resources are broken down by grade band to help you find the right resources for you. These are free to download and they complement children's trade books and help dive into NGSS aligned science topics, as well as some Common Core English language arts and math. And we also try and incorporate art for a really fun educational experience for kids around birds. A particular favorite around are the top two, the Ruby's bird and the crow not crow. Crow not crow is a really great way to start addressing bird identification with your students. So it teaches the very simple method of learning to identify birds just by learning to tell if it's crow or not a crow. So it's a great place for our youngest learners to start. We also have this great resource called Feathered Friends, which I'll share a link to in the chat window at the end. It is available as a free download, and it's kind of designed to be a monthly check-in with birds. And this is, if you download this resource, the follow-up email will provide you with the link to order the bird feeder. But since you all are attending this session today, I will share the direct link with you. So Feathered Friends is 10 monthly lessons lessons. They're kind of timely, so they fit the season that you are in. They have indoor and outdoor components, and we have had people use them in the classroom setting in their intended function as a monthly check-in, but lots of people will also choose to use them much closer together as a much tighter unit on birds, and we've had them adapted to environmental education settings as well. They cover themes like bird diversity, habitat, flight and migration, conservation, and citizen science. And they all have um, birds of the month that you get to meet, as well as in-depth learning objectives and some NGSS alignment that you can see what you are teaching your kids, as well as take-home connections. So if any of you are teaching remotely, these are a great resource for that as well if you have the opportunity to have your kids go do some independent exploration. So we also do a monthly introduction to a few birds, and we try and keep them applicable to all areas of the United States. So we have chickadees, finches, and woodpeckers here as groups. In other instances, you might see the American crow, because the American crow will focus on a specific species there because it is all over the US. And this is kind of our approach and our advice for identifying birds is to start with just a few. So if you are looking to and start a bird ID unit with your kids, I recommend starting with just a few. One of my favorite approaches to that is this monthly bird. Another way is to do kind of a focus bird with your kids. So assign each kid in your class a bird to get to know. They can draw it, they can write about it, and they become the little ID expert on their one bird. Or maybe for younger kids, you can do a team. And that way, you know, as a class, several different birds that you can go out and identify. Feeding birds also fits into this method really well because birds that come to your feeders are fewer than the total number of birds in your area, so you only need to know fewer birds if you want to identify them. And then this Feathered Friends resource will take you all the way from getting to know birds to encouraging you to participate in citizen science through the Great Backyard Bird Count. Another set of activities that I want to draw your attention to is the science and nature activities for cooped up kids. These were designed with families and educators in the mind at the beginning of schools going remote in March. And we've released several lessons throughout the period of remote learning and again starting now this school year. They are highly adaptable to the classroom. They have lots of great material and activities that you can pull from, and they are articulated across the grade bands. So we have K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8. And they incorporate a lot of great independent writing prompts and work assignments. So if you want to pull from those, there's lots of great resources for you there. And I'll share a link to that in the chat window. I wanted to bring this up because activity 9 is dedicated to feeding wild birds. So it covers things like what do birds eat, how do bird beaks relate to the sorts of diets that they have, and it goes through a little bit of how to engineer your own bird feeder like I discussed earlier. All right, now let's talk about citizen science. I've brought it up several times today, but I haven't really dived into what it is. So I am curious, what are some keywords or what's a definition or even a project that you think of when you hear the term citizen science? You can go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat window. Ooh, tracking sustainability in your neighborhood on a GPS map. That sounds like a really cool project. Turtle nest monitoring sounds like a cool one too. Yeah. So what do you think the citizen part is about in citizen science? Mark is suggesting tracking invasive species. Absolutely. Everyone working together to increase environmental awareness. I like that, Pamela. People monitoring. Absolutely. Susan is mentioning Seek. Yes, that is a great app for identifying uh, pretty much anything in nature if you can get a picture of it. And it's tied to the iNatural Citizen Science Project. Free, all can participate. Absolutely. You guys are hitting a lot of the big parts of what citizen science is and what makes citizen science special. So we like to think of citizen science as a way for folks who are not professional scientists, everyday folks like you and me and our students, to go out, make observations of the natural world, share those observations in a database that scientists then use to answer real world questions. And whenever I talk about citizen science, I have to pause for a second and share this image. So I'm wondering what you think this image represents. What are we looking at here? Electricity usage, light pollution, absolutely, it looks a lot like that. Population centers, yeah, you can kind of see some densely populated areas popping up on here for sure. But there's a reason for that. That doesn't have to do with actual numbers of people. So this is actually a map of data submitted to a citizen science project. So every point of light that you are seeing on this map is a submission to the eBird database. This is a large citizen science project that encompasses any bird people see wherever on the world that they are. And I noticed that somebody is saying there's routes. Yeah, you can see like shipping lines and even maybe roads if you look closely at the map here. And so what I love about this is that the fact that we can see the shape of our world, there's not really an underlying continental map here, shows that there are that many people out there who care about birds, who are making observations and sharing their observations in the eBird database. And then scientists can use that data to answer real world questions. And what that looks like by the numbers is we've had more than 800 million observations submitted to the database by more than 500,000 participants in every country in the world, recording more than 10,500 species of birds, which is more than 98% of birds in the entire world. So if you think about what it would take a scientist, a professional scientist, to duplicate this data set in their lifetime, it's not possible. This is only possible because citizen science is people-powered science. So, and we also view this as a partnership. So, us as the public participating get something out of it, and so do scientists. And we partner together to answer these real world questions. So, what's great about citizen science is that no matter what you are interested in, even if it isn't birds, which I don't know why it wouldn't be, but then I am very biased. But if your kids are interested in insects or you want to do something with coastal ecosystems, if you want to look at plants, there are projects out there for you. So I encourage you to check those out. I'll share a link to scistarter.org as well at the end, which is a great resource for finding the citizen science project that's local or deals with a subject that you are interested in. Now I want to take a moment to focus in on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's citizen science projects. We have 5 that are currently active, and they all follow basic scientific, or excuse me, the same basic pattern. So going out, identifying and observing birds, collecting data, entering that data online, and then number 4 is kind of what I think is special about citizen science projects and the lab citizen science projects in particular, you have the opportunity then to review and retrieve all of that data yourself and look at it. So all of those 800 million observations in the eBird database, you have the opportunity to check out. So if you want to see what people have been seeing in India, you can do that. So you have access to that data, and that's where that partnership comes in. Like, you are helping us understand the world. We want to give you that data back. So these projects include eBird, Project Feeder Watch, and the Great Backyard Bird Count, which we'll talk more about today. Another great project for the summertime is Nest Watch. And then Celebrate Urban Birds is a really great one for urban areas. It focuses on 16 very common species in urban areas, and also has a really fun and wonderful community celebration aspect. So what's great about citizen science and feeding birds together is you get kids outside observing birds, and they then know that their observations matter. Their bird counts are going to these important databases, and they are behaving as scientists. They are scientists when they do this. So the first project I want to introduce you to is the Great Backyard Bird Count. This is a project that takes place in February every year over 4 days, and it is just kind of like a snapshot of where our winter birds are. You can watch birds at a bird feeder, you can go through a walk around your school and watch birds, and all you need is a 15-minute count to be able to participate in this project. And you would enter that data into the eBird database. And I'll share again a link to that in the chat window at the end. The next project I want to introduce you to is Project Feeder Watch. This is a really great project. It has a really great history here in the US and expanding into Canada and other areas recently. And it is designed to run November through April. And so this is keeping track of our winter bird populations and how they're doing by watching our bird feeders. And so this actually has a really cool history of, like, people will start doing it and then they end up doing it for years and then have, 10 years of data on this one backyard. And how cool is that? Um, and it does have a small fee associated with it. It's $15 for members, $18 for non-members. And with that fee, you get a common feeder bird poster to help you identify birds, as well as the handbook, which has all the protocols in it. So what's great about Project Feeder Watch, if you want to do this with your students, is it has a little bit more of a stricter scientific protocol. So it will help you know exactly how to count the birds that you're seeing. So for example, you can only count as the maximum number of birds if you see them all at once. And what I mean by that is you have a chickadee that is visiting your feeder, and they love to take one seed and fly away and take one seed and fly away. You think you might have two because it went to a different direction last time when it left, but you're not sure. So you can only count two if you see two chickadees at the same time. Otherwise, you just count one. And so it will walk you through all of those protocols. And then that gives you a really great opportunity to talk to your students about the purpose of scientific protocols, right? So by counting in this way, even with species that are different, so you could tell the male and female apart, like in a cardinal, you still only would count that as one visit. And it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you might see one male cardinal alone and then a female cardinal alone, but you still only count that as one. And that has to do with making sure that the birds are counted in exactly the same way, which helps make the analysis of the number of birds easier for scientists. So it's a cool opportunity to talk about why scientific protocols exist. And this project is also a really important one for scientific data. So Project Feeder Watch data was some of the first data to really tell us that there was a decrease happening in evening grosbeaks. So this beautiful yellow bird you see here, which is more of a northern species, across multiple regions. So we can see in the top graph here that in the North Atlantic region especially, there was a pretty sharp decline in the percentage of feeders visited, accompanied by a less steep decline, but still a decline in the average number of birds seen at one time over these 20 years. And so this was a signal to us that there's something happening to the evening grosbeaks and that we needed to cue in on that for conservation action. And this actually was a published study. So these data are being used and published so that the scientific community and conservationists can use them to take action. So real data really being used. Let's take a step back again to eBird because this is a really cool citizen science project that you can do any time of year. So if you're thinking about birds for next spring when Project Feeder Watch won't be active anymore, eBird might be a great choice for you. Its motto is every bird counts. So any bird you see, anytime where you see it, anywhere you are, you can submit to the eBird database. And so this is a really cool project for you to get started on. And I wanted to bring this up because back in the day, a number of years ago now, when we were approaching the 100th millionth observation into eBird, everybody at the lab kind of thought it was going to be like a hotshot birder, somebody who submits multiple lists a day, maybe even somebody from the lab. But it ended up being 12-year-old Leron who submitted the observation of an American robin. And to me, that just really brings home that everybody's observations count, even of the most common birds. In fact, one of the mottos at the lab is keep common birds common because it's so much easier to protect birds than bring them back from the brink of extinction. So knowing how our common birds are doing is a great way for us to keep our fingers on the pulse of our environment. Plus, see, there's all sorts of really cool stuff that you can do with eBird data. So you can go on and you can explore data from anywhere in the country that you want to. And this, I just happened to do Missouri for this one. And I looked at the northern cardinal and the ruby-throated hummingbird, and I created these line graphs for them. And so we can see on our y-axis that we are looking at frequency or the percent chance that if you were to go out and do a bird list that you would see one of these species. So the green line is the northern cardinal, and we can see that we kind of hover over and above and sometimes below about 50% most of the time. So if you were to go out in Missouri any time of year, you have about a 50% chance of seeing a northern cardinal. Sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. On our x-axis here, we have time from January. Here we are in May, June, July, over into October, and now into December. So we have time of a full year here. So if we look at these two birds and we look at their graphs, we can actually make some inferences about how they live their lives. So can you tell anything about these birds from looking at these graphs? Just looking at the frequency of your chance to see them. I'm noticing a big difference between, oh, somebody's asking what happens the 1st of June? Yeah, so we have this dip in both of these bird species right here in June, don't we? So what are birds doing in June? What might be causing that dip? Yeah, mating season, right? They come back, they really get rolling on mating season in on spring, in late spring. So April, more May, birds are singing their heart outs, trying to find their mates. In June, they're nesting. So when birds have eggs in the nest, when they have uh, babies in the nest, they're a lot more secretive, right? They're not singing their hearts out anymore like they were in May, trying to find their mates. The females are probably sitting on eggs in June. And so they're just harder to detect. So we see this little bit of a dip in our ability to detect birds, which is kind of interesting. Doesn't mean they're gone, just means we can't detect them. Pamela's noticing that hummingbirds aren't around in the winter months. Yes. So what does that tell us about hummingbirds? It tells us that they're migratory, where we can see that the northern cardinal is around year round, so we know that this bird is a resident species that doesn't migrate. So that's pretty cool. We can tell something about their lives just by looking at these data. And so you can generate these data yourself by going on to the eBird website and visiting the Explore tab. And if we have time at the end, I will show you how to do that. What's wonderful about participating in citizen science and bringing birds to your window with bird feeders is the opportunity to encourage student inquiry. So you'll see that once you start engaging kids in this sort of focused learning, that they'll start becoming so curious about birds. They'll start asking all sorts of amazing questions. Some you'll be able to look up to find the answers. Some are answers you might have to find yourself. So it provides a really great opportunity to jump into inquiry. So we have a free curriculum called Investigating Evidence that you can download and start exploring ways to use citizen science to inspire inquiry projects. Projects like this one. So this is one of my favorites by Amy, who is a fourth grader. And she asked, will a fake cat scare away birds? So she was watching her bird feeders for, I think it was for school. She was watching her bird feeders for school, and she noticed that any time that a cat was her neighbor's cat was outside, that there were less birds at her feeder, and she wanted to know if there was a relationship there. Well, she couldn't very well tether her neighbor's cat to the tree, so she decided to use a fake cat to try and see if there was a reaction from birds. So here's what she found. She put the feed her out for a week without the cat, and she found that birds ate 3.5 cups of seed. She put it out for a week with the cat and found that birds only ate half a cup of seed. So, big difference there. And she concluded that the cat was a good guard. And then she wrote the study up and submitted it to our Bird Sleuth Investigator magazine, which is a student focused science report and artwork magazine. What I love about this is she didn't stop there, right? That's the answer to her study, is that yes, the cat affects the number of birds that approach. And I appreciate that she put it as a good guard, that the cat was guarding the feeder instead of scaring the birds. Um, but she went further. That great thing that science does, it answers one question and inspires even more. She said, but I thought that birds would learn the cat was fake. So she made a prediction. If she left the fake cat out there over time, she predicted that the amount of seed eaten would increase until eventually it approached the amount of seed that they ate when the stuffed cat wasn't present. So what a great little study to do. Another fun study was this mixed class of kindergarten and first graders, I believe it was. And they were looking at the effect of snow depth on bird counts. And so they were using skills that they were learning in class, measuring and counting, and they used that to do a bird study. So they counted the number of birds and went out and measured the depth of the snow and made this graph to see if there was a relationship. What I love about both of these studies is they didn't actually have to learn to identify birds, so they found other ways to measure their impact. Amy looked at the amount of seed eaten. These kids looked at just the total number of birds that they observed. So there are ways that if you are intimidated by bird identification or don't have time to include that in your unit, that you can still study birds via bird feeding without having to learn to identify every bird that you see. And I wanted to bring this into our discussion today because I think it is relevant. So, there is kind of this essential question that we have to answer for our students, right? Why are we doing this? Does this matter? And citizen science does a good job of answering that question, but there is a larger context at play as well that I wanted to share with you. So, about a year ago now, a paper was released in Science by Cornell Lab scientists and some amazing scientists from partner institutions that looked at the total number of birds, regardless of species, just total number of birds in Canada and the United States, and found that over the last 50 years, we have lost 2.9 billion birds just in a human lifetime in 50 years. So that is kind of a staggering amount of loss, right? And what our scientists were curious about was, where is this happening? What groups of birds? And they found that it was happening across a lot of different ecosystems, across a lot of different species. We're seeing these declines. And so that is a big signal to us that there's something wrong in our ecosystems. They're losing the ability to support life. What that looks like in terms of feeder birds is 1 in 4 gone since 1970. That is not a sustainable rate of loss. But the good news here is that when we looked at birds that have had concerted conservation efforts directed towards themselves or their habitats, we see that their populations increase. So when we take action, we make a difference. For raptors, we eliminated pesticides like DDT that were accumulating and thinning their eggshells. For waterfowl and for woodpeckers, we restored and protected their habitats and they rebounded. So if we act before the species uh, their numbers drop too low, they can recover. And so, what is really wonderful about this study is this message of hope that we can do something about this. But also, this data was citizen science data. So, the Christmas bird count was used for a large portion of this data. And that is one of the longest running citizen science projects in the country. So it's things like eBird and Project Feeder Watch that are going to be telling us in the future when we've succeeded in reversing these trends. So your kids are part of the solution when they participate in things like citizen science. So we came up with these 7 simple actions to help birds, and you'll notice that citizen science is one of them. There's another couple things that you can do and might be exciting ways to involve your students in learning about birds and taking action. You can make windows safer within your school. Using that window bird feeder is a great way to reduce window collisions around bird feeding, but sometimes birds just hit the windows, and you can use decals and other things to help make your windows safe for birds as well. We've had some great projects submitted to us around that as well. So the kids can get really into these things. If you have the opportunity to do some gardening or you have a school garden that's vegetable driven, you might consider also planting some native plants, which will help support your local bird population. So there are the opportunities to embrace several different sorts of projects here to help improve the lives of your local birds. And there we go. There's number 7, watch birds, share what you see through citizen science. All right. Any questions about what we talked about or other bird related topics? I think I saw one go by in the chat window. Yes, Elizabeth was asking, does the Cornell Lab Merlin app report the birds that you've identified to the database? Great question, Elizabeth. So Merlin and eBird, they do have a relationship, right? So Merlin knows what birds are around you because of citizen science observations in eBird. So it pulls from the database for that. And there is now an option in Merlin. It might only be in Android. If it is only in Android, it's coming to iPhone soon, where you can connect your sightings to eBird. There's like an extra step you have to take. You have to say, yes, I want to share this sighting in eBird, and then fill in some extra data around like where are you, what time of day it is, how many people are out there, the general things that eBird always asks you. And then you can share that sighting that way. All right. So another question asking is any good advice for a source of affordable binoculars? Great question, Susan. This is kind of a challenge to teaching birds, isn't it? Um, I will say do not invest in like the toy style binoculars. Even for the younger kids, they just break so easy. They don't really function. It ends up often being wasted money. We used to have a binocular grant, unfortunately, due to some economic circumstances, our sponsor had to pull out, but we're hoping to be able to offer binocular grants ourselves again. Sometimes local Autobahns have grants or might have a connection that can help you. So I would reach out to like a local nature center or Autobahn group. Um, and then there are some good binoculars out there for relatively low expense. I don't like to like say definitely use this brand because there are brands out there that I haven't held in my hands. I only like to recommend ones that I've used myself, and two that I think that have a really good like price to quality ratio would be Wingspan and Celestron. So I would check them out. You might even consider using Donors Choose or an organization like that to help raise money for those. And sometimes you can email a binocular company and be like, do you have any educator discounts? Oh, and then Amy's saying that FAST has grants, but they won't be available until next fall. But awesome for planning. Great. Um, yeah, any other questions? But while you're thinking or typing, I want to share with you some ways to stay in contact with us. You can always email us at k12lab@cornell.edu, visit our website, or find us on social media. They call it social, but it's actually kind of lonely, so please add us on Twitter. Oh, and I need to get you your links. So I'm going to stop my screen share for now, and I will share some links in the chat window.